Hello again, football fans. Chris Dunn here with another RFL draft preview. This time, we're going to take a look at the Atlanta Thunderbirds. So this is a team here that kind of underperformed a little bit. If you take a look back at where they've been historically versus where they were last year. Obviously, if you're a fan of the Thunderbirds, you were disappointed by the fact that he was unable to make a run into the postseason. And so that's where this team is going to be looking to get, right? Obviously, that's the goal. They play in a difficult NRC South Mexico City Diablos. You've also got the Dallas Desperados and the Tampa Bay Tigers. So certainly not the easiest division. Obviously, if you've been paying attention to the offseason here, you've seen some of the moves that the Diablos have made. And I think clearly you're thinking that the Diablos are probably the team to beat in that division. And the Thunderbirds kind of regain that spot atop that division. So when we look at the draft picks that they will have, I'll go ahead and pull that up here for you guys so you can see. The Thunderbirds will pick 6 times this weekend, 12th overall in the first round, and then again in the 2nd, 3rd, 5th, 6th, and 7th, they will pick 12th. So 6 total picks. They do not have a pick in round 4. So keep that in mind. When we get to Sunday afternoon, they'll have to wait to hear their name called, their team name called on Sunday afternoon, as they don't have a pick in round 4. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. That way you guys can get a peek at what the situation looks like down in Atlanta, what the roster looks like, who they've got that are potential free agents at the end of the year, and then what the depth chart looks like. So if we go ahead and take a peek down, you've got names like Wayne Norman, free agent at the end of the year, Jiren Gray, Tate Phillips, Carl Bodine, Alex Morincola, right? Like these are some talented players. Obviously, when you look at the likes of Norman and Gray at the top there, those are big names on the defense, right? Big names on the defense, big money on the defense also. Like, let's not forget, those contracts coming off the books are gonna save them a little bit. And then you've got QPOC actually down there as well. So if you're looking at, and then let's not forget about Juice Adams even too. If you're looking at this roster and you're looking at the guys that need to be re-signed or else they're going to lose, obviously you would think that the number one priority here is probably going to be QPOC, right? I mean, they just made the trade to get him. You would have never, ever, it is the worst general managing move in the history of general managers for you to give up the amount of draft capital that you gave up and then not re-sign him. So clearly QPOC is going to be the number one priority. They absolutely have to get him re-signed because they gave up way too much value, way too much draft capital, just way too much overall talent to justify acquiring him for only 1 year. So QPOC, I would imagine as soon as he is open and ready to negotiate, he will be the first player re-signed for the Thunderbirds. And then after that point, we can look at the likes of a Wayne Norman, a Jiren Gray, Tate Phillips, Carl Bodine, right? So if we go and we look at the depth chart, right? And so let's look at Tate Phillips, right? Right now, they've only got 2 tight ends on the roster in Tate Phillips and Dylan Romo. Now, if you let Tate Phillips walk, you do have Dylan Romo, who's 23 years old, 74 overall. Like, you can develop that, right? So if you're worried about being able to re-sign Tate Phillips, if he's asking for too much money, then you could, I could envision a scenario where they might say, okay, Dylan Romo, it's your time. Season 11, you're going to be the tight end number 1. And then in the draft with one of these 6 picks, I could see them potentially looking to take a tight end because obviously you want to have more than 2 tight ends on the roster. Ultimately, if they do decide to re-sign Tate Phillips, which I think it's all going to come down to how much money he's asking for, I think the best case scenario here for the Thunderbirds is that somebody like Tate Phillips is asking for maybe a 2-year deal. Maybe at the absolute most, you give him a 3-year deal and you hope that the dollars, the AAV, is not too high. And if you can get that deal done, then I think that's the ideal scenario. You bring back Tate Phillips, again, ideally on a 2-year deal. Maybe you can get it for, less than $10 million a year. And you bring him back for 2 years. I think that's a nice move to make. I don't know if you're going to be able to re-sign him for less than 10 million. I haven't looked too deep at what the 28-year-old high overall tight end market is in terms of what they're asking for in free agency. And then Dylan Romo gets a chance to develop as that number 2 tight end. I think that's ideally what you'd like to do, right? So Kupak being the number 1 priority in terms of free agency. Also got to look at Tate Phillips. Again, if you can get him on a lower AAV under that, 12 to 13 million for sure. And no more than like 2 years, that would be ideal. And then if you're looking at the wide receivers again, you've got Kupak there. That is an absolute, a must in terms of re-signing. You've got Devontae Sharkley there. So this is a extremely formidable, young, talented wide receiver group that I think is only going to get better. So it's definitely a group. If you're looking at position groups in the RFL as a whole, I think the wide receiver group in Atlanta is one of those groups that you're looking at and you're watching all year, right? And so I'm not too worried about that. Again, Kupak is an absolute must to get re-signed there. If you go to the offensive line, you're sitting okay. You're sitting pretty good here, right? You've got 3 guys that are in the low to mid 80s. Nobody really close to that 30-year-old mark yet. You've got Rashawn McIntosh, who's 27. Reed Zinger, 27. I mean, Rashawn Manning, okay, fine. He's at the 30 mark. But again, he's at your center position, right? So it's a little bit easier to potentially replace a guy like a center because a lot of times you can move a guy from right guard, left guard into center. So a little bit more options when you're trying to replace a center. So I think they're fairly decent, pretty good on the offensive line. I don't see anything here that says, oh my God, you absolutely have to address offensive line early in the draft. I certainly think that if they wanted to, with that 5th round pick, right? If there was a center on the board or maybe an offensive guard that they could maybe transition into center, I think that's a place that they could go. But I don't envision a scenario where you're trying to necessarily grab, the best offensive lineman or, one of the top 2 or 3 offensive linemen. And so I just don't see offensive line necessarily being an early focal point for them. And then when you look at the defensive line, here's where you've got Jaron Gray, right? Like, again, we've already established we've got 2 guys that are going to be, should be priorities in terms of re-signing. And Jaron Gray is actually probably going to be priority number 2, right? Like, I think the priority to bring him back is probably greater than the priority to bring Tate Phillips back. But that's my opinion, right? Perhaps the Thunderbirds don't feel that way. And at 12, there's the opportunity where if you're not going to re-sign Gray or he's asking for too much money, well, maybe you trade him. If the season goes off the rails early on and that he's going to walk at the end of the year and he's asking for a lot of money, well, then you could certainly trade him, try to recoup some draft capital. At 12, you could envision a scenario where they might want to go edge, right? If you're worried about, I don't know when negotiations are going to open up with Gray, right? But if they're not going to open up until week 8, week 9, week 10, and you're worried about the cost and the ability to bring back all of these big players, well, then I could see a scenario where at 12, you might go and you might get one of those edge rushers. You look at Ohio State and you look at a guy like Nick O'Quinn, right? Could he be available at 12? I think that's a definite possibility. And if you are the Thunderbirds and you're worried about what this might look like and what the future might look like, maybe that's a route that you want to go. Certainly, you've got Max Knight there. I mean, obviously, one of the best players in the league. And then if you look at the defensive tackle position, you've got a handful of guys right there, and all of those guys are starting caliber, if you will. Obviously, you've got Carl Bodine, the potential free agent. At 30 years old, are you going to bring him back? If you're not going to bring him back, then again, is defensive tackle an area that they might want to address? At the 12th pick in the first round, you're not going to be able to get a Wyatt Harris. So do you try to get maybe the second, defensive tackle? I don't think that really makes sense here for the Thunderbirds. I think that they could ride out with what they have at the position and then try to address anything that they might need to address in the future. Maybe that's in the draft next year. Maybe that's during the season if you're worried about losing guys. Or let's not forget, they could always do something in free agency next year as well if they were worried about the position. And then if you look at the linebackers here, you've got Wayne Norman, again, free agent at the end of the year, but he's 32 years old. So this is where I think things will start to get a little bit interesting if you're the Thunderbirds, because I don't know how likely or if they want to bring back a Wayne Norman, right? And if you're not going to bring him back, well, then I do 100% think that linebacker is where they could go with that first round pick, right? You've got Daniel Silverio. You've got Juice Adams. Juice Adams is also a free agent at the end of the year. And I know this sounds kind of crazy, but I almost would rather see the Thunderbirds bring back. I think that Juice Adams should be more of the priority in terms of re-signing than Wayne Norman. And when you look at the overall, I get it. Wayne Norman is an X factor. He's 93 overall, but he's 32 years old. We do not know how much he's going to regress at the end of this year. And Juice Adams is on the way up. He's only getting better. Right now, Juice Adams is only star dev, and he's only a 77 overall, which going into his walk year means you can probably re-sign him at an affordable contract right now. He's not superstar dev. He's not an 85, 86, 87 overall player. He's a 77 overall, and he's 24 years old. So his development window is closing within the next basically 3 years, right? Once you hit 27 years old, your development window is really starting to close. At that point, it's really difficult for you to go up, get more than one XP upgrade throughout the season. Once you hit 28 years of age, sometimes even 27, especially if you're, a normal dev player. But if you bring back Juice Adams, well, now you've got Daniel Silverio, you've got Juice Adams. And if you can go out, and again, if you're trying to replace a Wayne Norman and you're looking for a guy to be that middle linebacker type, well, is there anybody better in this draft class than Brian O'Connor? The answer is no, right? So I think both Ohio State linebackers here, both Ohio State guys on defense, whether it's Brian O'Connor or it's Nick O'Quinn, I think both of those guys could be potential fits. But it remains to be seen. If the Thunderbirds decide that they want to bring back Wayne Norman, well, then I certainly don't think that they would go middle linebacker or a linebacker of any sort at 12. But for me, I do think that Juice Adams is a priority, right? Like, he was a guy that you selected a few years ago. And I think that it's really important, especially when you have guys like Kupak that are going to demand a lot of money. You have guys like Devontre Sharkley that's going to demand a lot of money when he becomes a free agent. It's really important to be able to re-sign guys like a Juice Adams, who's a 77 overall. If you could re-sign Juice Adams for 4 years, right, or maybe even 5 years, you've basically guaranteed yourself Juice Adams all the way up until age 29. And if you give him a 5-year deal, you can probably lower the AAV per year, which means you might be able to get him really cheap and affordable. And in 2 years, he might be a really good contributing linebacker for this team. And if you have a really good defensive linebacker making contributions on a weekly basis, and he's not costing you a lot of money, that's really important. And then let's take a look at some of the other positions here. So looking at the secondary, I mean, the secondary here is fantastic, right? We've got ESJ, Xavier Mays, Alex Morincola, again, potential free agent at the end of the year. He's 33 years old. And then you've got Bill Stevens, and then you drop down 23-year-old Jeffrey Colvin, who is a 77 overall at the free safety position. So I look here and then I say, you know what? If the Thunderbirds wanted to go secondary, I could see it also, right? You've got ESJ, again, Alex Morincola, potential free agent, at the end of the year. We talked about these other guys. Wayne Norman, probably going to ask for quite a bit of money. If you're not going to bring him back, well, then I could see you going linebacker. Jaron Gray, probably going to ask for quite a bit of money. If you're not going to bring him back, I could see you going edge rush. Tate Phillips, I think you got to bring him back. I don't think he's going to ask for too much money. And if you can get him on a 2-year deal, I think that makes sense. Carl Bodine, you kind of do what you want there. They've got 4 defensive tackles that I think that they could, be strategic and mix and match a little bit. So ultimately, I don't know that Bodine is a large priority. These other 3, I think, are. And then obviously you got to figure out what you want to do with Morincola, and Kupak is priority number 1, right? So if Kupak is priority number 1, and then you say a guy like Jaron Gray and Wayne Norman are kind of like priority, 2A and 2B, then that means a guy like Alex Morincola might not be coming back. And if Morincola is not coming back, well, then I think that opens up the door to possibly go DB at 12 overall. Because again, if you're looking at the depth chart, yes, you have ESJ, and yes, you have Bill Stevens, but Bill Stevens is 28 years old and he's 83 overall. That's a fantastic number 2 corner. But at that point, you don't have a number 3 corner unless you're going to give Kelly Trenton some everyday run, which you could, but maybe that's not where you want to go. I think if you wanted to, in this draft class, you could take somebody at 112. You might even be able to get a corner at 212 that within 1 year is going to be, a better overall player for you than a guy like a Kelly Trenton. So when I look at that 112 pick, I think a lot of it is going to be centered around what their plans are with the guys that are potential free agents, right? So we're kind of talking about linebacker, maybe middle linebacker, also possibly edge. And then, it could also be a DB, a corner, if you wanted to look that route, if you're worried about Morincola, right? I think those are probably some of the areas where I'm thinking the Thunderbirds might want to go. And so if you look at the prospects there, right, like let's just go and take a peek at the corner market, right? You're picking 12th. Okay, so you're picking 12th. Guy like Xavier Savage, you gotta feel like he's gone. He's gone in the top 10. A guy like Jack Sky, this is where I think things get a little bit interesting. I think he's also gone in the top 10. If he's not, then I think that's absolutely the play. I think the Thunderbirds would be thrilled to be able to get Jack Sky at 12. I think that would be arguably the best case scenario for them. But even if that's not the case, even if Xavier Savage and Jack Sky are both gone, take your pick on who you like as the 3rd corner. Is that Brian Robinson? Is that Elijah Carter? Is it Kenzo Udo, JoJo Carter? Vinny Ball and Brandon Cherry at LSU, they just won a national championship. Their stock is on the rise. Vinny Ball was one of the best DBs last year. Brandon Cherry was one of the best DBs this year. So, those guys, while you might look at the rankings from Pecan here, and Vinny Ball and Brandon Cherry are 7th and 8th in terms of the cornerback position, you can make an argument that maybe those guys aren't 7 and 8. Maybe those guys are like 2 and 3 or 3 and 4 or 4 and 5, right? So I certainly think that corner is an area that they could go. But if you think that Xavier Savage and Jack Sky are tier 1, and then all these other guys are kind of tier 2, right? Everyone from like the Brian Robinson line all the way down to the Brandon Cherry line. If you think that's kind of all one tier and you can interchange those guys a little bit, well, then maybe you don't go corner at 112 because maybe one of those guys fall to you at 212, right? Is the difference between Brian Robinson and JoJo Carter or Kenzo Udo and Brandon Cherry, is that difference so large that you need to use your 1st round pick instead of your 2nd round pick? Because if it's not, well, then you could go corner at 212, right? If you can get a Vinny Ball, a JoJo Carter, an Elijah Carter, one of those guys at 212, well, then that opens up the door for you at 112. And again, if we're going to look at the linebacker position, right? Like we're talking middle linebacker at 112, there's a chance that maybe you're getting the best middle linebacker in this draft class in Brian O'Connor. If Brian O'Connor is there at 112 and you believe what I just said about the corner position and that you feel more confident in one of those other tier 2 corners with the second round pick, well, then that could be the way to go, right? Because what do you think is better, having Brian O'Connor in the first round and JoJo Carter in the second round, or having Brian Robinson in the first round and then having Edward Schuler or, George Ellington in the second round? For my money, I think you're better suited going Brian O'Connor in the first and one of those DBs in the second rather than vice versa. And so for my money, if Brian O'Connor's there, that's a conversation that has to be had in Atlanta. And then if you're looking at other linebackers, like maybe you want to get creative and you want to move some guys around, a Montel Wright, Ramon Flowers, like these guys, I think will be there at 12. If you're looking at the edge rushing linebackers, like I mentioned, a Nick O'Quinn, if you wanted to go edge, if Nick O'Quinn is there at 12, I think that's a conversation that you have to have. And then you've got the likes of Hassan Bird, Raheem Underwood, Tyrese Evans, all those guys, depending on who you like the most. But again, I think all of these names that I kind of threw out there, with the exception of Nick O'Quinn, the exception of Brian O'Connor, and obviously Xavier Savage and Jack Sky, the Thunderbirds could, if they're looking at the edge rusher, the linebackers, and the DB, the corner position, I think they could get 2 of those higher tier guys with that first round and second round pick. Again, if that's the way that they want to go, just looking at the roster, that's the scenario I could see. But again, that's just me. And that's just looking at some of Pecan's rankings here. We're going to see how this is all going to play out, because you're going to get your answer to this later tonight, right? Like this draft preview will drop the afternoon of the first round of the draft. So we'll see how it's all going to play out. It's certainly an exciting day for those of you that woke up this morning super excited. The RFL draft is here. Round 1 is tonight. So we're going to get a lot of answers to a lot of these questions that we've been asking ourselves for the last month and a half. We're going to get those answers tonight. So that's going to do it for the Atlanta Thunderbirds draft preview. Be sure to hit the subscribe button, hit the bell icon, and I'll get a couple more of these out today. I'm not going to be able to get everyone completed. I apologize if I don't get to your team, but I will get a few more after this one, so that we do have some content going all the way up to the draft for you guys. So stick around for that. But until those other ones are dropped, this has been Chris Dunn with another RFL draft preview. Take care, everybody.